Hey, good morning. Sorry I'm late with today's update. I was at family's over the weekend, and I thought that I would be able to get some things done. And I did get a lot of writing done, but there was absolutely no way to get out and get any video done. So, had to wait for this update until we got home. I'm making an effort not to use filler words, and I already said once, so I'm working not to do that. And all the video rabbit hole that I went down on this subject basically talked about pausing more and closing your mouth when you're not talking. I think I tend to do, and sounds when I'm trying to figure out what I want to say. So I'm also putting more effort into, well, I've always had an outline when I'm doing these videos, but I've started actually writing out a lot of what I want to say, at least on other videos that I'm working on. But if it's been annoying you, it's something I'm aware of and I'm working on it. It annoys me, so I'm trying not to do that. So is also a filler word. Any gap between two sentences that are statements that is filled by a sound is a filler word. Apparently, I've been doing it a lot. I also tend to talk fast. I always have throughout my life. And I read a while ago that talking fast or basically always being busy, always feeling like you need to be doing something, which is something I got from my dad. He never sits still, always working in some way or another, can be a manifestation of anxiety. And filler word. I've never thought of myself as being exceptionally anxious. I was an Army officer. I worry about a lot of things all the time, but generally it's because I am trying to control outcomes. And I can't control outcomes, not at this point in my life, for a lot of things. So the story there is I'm working to slow down. Slow down with my speaking, slow down with my thoughts, slow down with purchases, because I also tend to buy things. Oftentimes tools, computer equipment, things like that, when it might solve a problem in the moment, when I probably could wait, but I choose to spend money. I also have the luxury of, I'm not buying really large things when I do this, but I do tend to, if it's a small electronic item or something, I'll buy it. This weekend, we got up to family's place, and I've been using a Pomera D50 or 250 US, which I'll do a video about that because I've really come around in that device and I'm liking it a lot. But I forgot the SD card reader that you need to transfer files from their device to any machine where you want to do editing, because the 250 is basically just a clamshell keyboard with a screen. It's got this interesting feature where you can scan a QR code of the thing that you were writing and email it to your, like, it takes that QR code and will turn it into text on your phone if you have a QR code reader. But then I also discovered it only does about 500 words, and I was working on a longer thing and I didn't want to have to do the whole QR code going back and forth, figuring out how much of it was actually copying over. I could have been more patient and done it without the SD card reader, but I also wanted a smaller SD card reader that was USB-C. And so you get where I'm going with this. I had the $12 to buy it, and I bought it. But those $12 do add up, and that's a thing I'm trying to be aware of. If you could see my desk right now, it's just covered in junk, a lot of it electronic, some of it related to video and other things like that, which needs to be organized. So that's definitely a thing I'm working on. It's been a productive week, and I feel pretty good about it. Going to a family's place threw things off a bit. It was nice to get away. It was a short trip. I did get a lot of writing done, though. So, Lissa's Vengeance, I have added about 5,000 words to that manuscript. So I think I was at 94,000 words. I'm at 103 words. And at this point, it's less about the words than it is about actually getting the scenes finished that I want to finish so that all of the plot points are done. So I'm kind of ticking those off as I just work my way forward. I wrote a whole sequence that was a lot of fun and solved a few problems for me. So now that plot line is in it had its climax, and now it's in its descending action. And I need to write some sort of resolution scenes of two characters interacting where they are not going to resolve their conflict, but one character, my main character, Lissa, will at least get some form of resolution in that she will have moved this obstacle off the board. And then we're going to introduce a new character because that's the way this series works, right? We need kind of keep things going for the time being. But I've introduced a very cool new character that I'm pretty excited about. So I got to do that. It's easier to write a lot of words when you're doing a big movement like that. Now I need to go back and just clean up a couple plot points, do some descending action for the whole book, which will take us into the next book. And that next book is the end of a 4-book series. So there's going to be big battles, a lot of stuff happening, and also a major betrayal at the end, which we won't, hopefully haven't seen coming. Spoiler alert. I've also been working on an 8,000 word short story for Raconteur Press. They are doing an anthology called Insert Coin, which wanted things that were like Tron. And so I wrote a adventure story about two sisters that get sucked into a Final Fantasy type game. And it's sort of some family stuff gets played out, but I also just tried a lot to beat up the character as much as I possibly could. The main character is just problem after problem after problem all the way through. And I only did one break in this story. And that was for the point where they get pulled into the video game and then wake up in the game. And that's always a little hard when you're doing a portal fantasy because you have to get the character to accept where they are. And so if you can hit them with something they have to respond to as quick as possible, then you don't have to waste a lot of time with the, is this real? Is it not real? What's happening? Do I need to do anything about this? Should I try and get out? Well, if you have a monster attacking you right away, you don't have a lot of time to worry about that. And if you have monsters attacking you the whole way through, you don't have a lot of time to worry about that. So that's really why I wanted to keep things moving on this story. It was fun to write. It also, I did a lot of editing on this, which I don't always do because it was different for me to write this. But I made a real effort because I had to keep it within a word count to go back and do a lot of editing for passive voice, constructions that are passive. And the thing about removing a like basically a construction that is passive, like there was, or anytime the character ED did something and you want to move that into active, well, you have to rewrite the whole sentence in a lot of ways. And then depending on what the paragraph looked like, you need to go and adjust the whole paragraph. And when you have a single character doing things, a lot of times you end up with name, pronoun, name, pronoun, name, pronoun. In this case, it was Kara doing all these things, and then she did these things. And then I didn't want there to be several Karas in a line, right, on sentences showing action. So for me, I go through and try and fix all those things. And this was because it's an action-driven story. Like a lot of what's happening in it is just explicit. This happened, this happened, this happened. I'm not trying to be super flowery, or I shouldn't say flowery, but I'm not trying to show the action in a way that is suggesting what it is. as opposed to they walked onto the porch and approached the door to they opened the door, which suggests all the things they did between those 2 points. And where I can do that, I do, but because I wanted this world to be seen, I try to put more of those details in there. But that can also slow down the action. So it's a thing that I try to balance as I'm working through it. And then something weird happened while I was working on this story. We're in the family room. There's a desk. Everybody else is watching a movie. I'm working on it. I'm working on a passage that I am not particularly happy with. And I'm getting into that place where I've finished the story, but now I'm feeling like it's all bad. And why have I spent so much time doing this? When I feel something to my side and I look over and there's a family member reading over my shoulder. It sure looked to me like they were reading the story. And I looked at them. I'm like, what are you doing? Well, I'm reading over your shoulder. Don't do that. Going back, I don't know why I was so frustrated about that. I think it's because the story was not something I was ready to share yet, and I was not happy with the story. We had to work it out later, but I looked at them like they were crazy. And I wasn't sure what my response was. I simultaneously felt very angry. And then also asking myself, why are you angry about this? It's not a big deal. But it felt like a big deal in the moment. So that was a weird thing. I realized that until I'm ready to share something, even if I think it's not great, I don't want other people to see it. And there's that whole adage about write like you think no one's going to read it, right? Sing like you think no one will hear, dance like you think no one's watching. Well, when it comes to getting a draft out, like I'm just trying to get words on the screen, and then I go back and fix the words to the best of my ability. And if I'm not ready for someone to see those words, or at least for me to make the excuse that these words aren't as good as I could make them, please don't hold that against me. Yeah, I was frustrated about that. Maybe I'm way off base, but that was a weird experience. Anyway, I finished that story in about 3 days, and I wrote much of it in the car. My wife did a lot of the driving, which I really appreciated. And one of the nice things about the Pomera D250 was it sat really nicely on my knees, and because it has a small keyboard, or a small screen, I was able to write on it, and I'm lucky I don't get car sick, and so I was able to get a lot of work done. So that was awesome. And then on the way back, I wrote about 1,500 words on an essay I suppose I'm working on, which is it's a conversation that has come up a lot with friends of mine, especially as we are working through this transition of AI slop, and we've been living with Kindle Unlimited and places like Railroad. What is the line between content and, in this case, writing? Is it all content? Am I off base because I grew up really having it drilled into my head that words are valuable? You write as few words as possible to get the point across. You spend a lot of time trying to pare those words down. And that time is a thing that actually works against us now, because it really seems like the thing the market rewards when it comes to attention and money, if you're trying to make a living at this, is consistency and getting it out on a schedule and doing it like on Patreon or Railroad weekly. And there isn't a lot of time to polish anything. And the effort that's being put in is hopefully mental, but then really the physical effort of writing the thing and then publishing it. There isn't all the follow-on effort of the rereading, the rewriting, the editing, the reconsidering from different angles. All the stuff that writers have been taught for a long time is what makes a quote-unquote good thing. The amount of effort that's put into it, not necessarily what the audience or reader thinks when they absorb it. But we're obviously in a time where content wins out. And now, and there was always lazy content, which maybe in a writing context would be, I don't even know. I'm not going to say fan fiction because fan fiction's hard to write depending on what you're writing. I am absolutely not going to denigrate fan fiction, and people like to denigrate romance, and I will say romance is also hard to write if you're going to really please the audience and do what they want. So for me, no writing is easy. I don't think of any writing as lazy content. And I've been struggling actually to come up with examples like that. Like maybe, but even streaming, I think it's a skill to be able to play a game and banter and be funny while you're doing it. I watch other streams that definitely do feel like, I don't even know why people are watching this, or, reaction videos or things like that. Like, okay, that could be quantified as lazy content. I still think there are skills that go into making that and obviously being successful at it. But how does that relate to writing? And so that's what I'm trying to get my thoughts around. And how do we respond to that? And what do you do going forward with it? When obviously you want to write the best thing you can, but there is also only so much time. So I'm gathering my thoughts around that, and I want to do some sort of essay thing, or maybe it'll just be a conversation. That's probably what will happen because I am not a video editor, so it's just about getting the conversation out. There's also the double work of, I don't think I've talked about this a lot yet. I'm applying to go get a MFA in writing. The reason for that is I would like to teach at some point, and at least where I live, having an MFA is pretty much the threshold to get into a teaching job. Definitely at the university level, often also at the community college level, which is what I would be doing in my area, most likely. I also get a pretty good tuition discount through my job. So if I had to pay full price, I don't think I would be doing it. But because I have this opportunity, I feel like I should use it. But one of the things I have to do as part of the application is a nonfiction piece. And I would like to be able to write essays better than I do. So that's a thing that I'm working on, and gathering those thoughts and getting them together is what I've been spent some time on. And so moving into reading, that plays into what I've been working on with the essay piece is I need to read more essays. And so I was reading a Reddit thread on the Print SF subreddit where people were talking about forgotten writers or writers that don't get the due that they deserve. And one of the names that came up was Thomas Disch, who I had never read anything by him. And I went back to my library and found I had a book of essays by him called On SF. So I read a couple essays there, and I shouldn't say read. I listened to them using Speechify, which takes the EPUB and will read it to you. I don't actually think that's a good way to try and absorb this kind of material because I kept having to go back and listen to it again, and I probably should reread it. I will reread it as actual text. He's really taking science fiction seriously, which I appreciate that, but he's also writing in the early 80s. And so it's really interesting to see a lot of the stuff that he's calling basically the same things that we would say about indie publishing in a lot of ways, or, hack writing. He's saying about stuff that's now considered classics. So that's really kind of funny to read. He's also got a really interesting take on Starship Troopers, which I had not ever read before. If you're really looking at what the characters do and what they wear and how they respond to things versus, I think, the political ideas in the story. And before I think I'm going to go back and reread at least certain parts of Starship Troopers to see if I agree with him or not. And then I have had Language of the Night by Ursula K for a long time, which is also a book of essays. I spent a little time organizing my my e-reader. So I had broken it down into, fiction, essays, short stories. And so I found all these essay collections I had that I hadn't looked at in a long time. Language of the Night is a collection of things that Ursula K. LeGuin wrote mostly in the early 70s. So it's a little bit all over the place, but she has one essay in the beginning called On Fantasy, which is basically about why don't Americans take fantasy seriously. And this was written back in 1974. And part of her thesis is even how people read and who is allowed to read. And she goes down the path of women are allowed to read and men are not, and take stereotypes as you will that masculine and feminine can be present in anybody, right? Um, but she's really, really getting into, and also sort of the Protestant idea of work ethic and time should be spent being productive. That for men, at least, they're socialized not to believe fiction is productive. And so while men might be reading a lot of self-help books, if they read at all, most of them think that reading is a waste of time. And also within that, fantasy is the biggest waste of time of all. I don't know if that stands up today. I think the difference is that maybe fewer people are reading, although I'd be curious to if there was some way to compare those stats. Reading is so different these days. Consuming things is very different. Yes, a lot of our media is very visual, which it was back then as well. People watched a lot of TV. They read newspapers. There was still a lot of things in newspapers, from comics to essay. I mean, newspapers sometimes ran fiction as well. Not a lot. I wouldn't call that fiction reading necessarily. But I think it's hard to make that comparison. The reason this kind of stood out to me is because of all the arguments you keep seeing about men don't read and the publishing industry does not speak to men like it used to. I also think a lot of those critiques are missing a good portion of the market where a lot of reading is happening. But also, the number of people that read has shrunken because there is so much competition from all these other places. I think it's interesting, and I would like to do some kind of conversation about this in the future, that people are coming back to reading. I think it's hard to quantify that in a lot of ways, but the places that I look where people are having conversations, there is a lot of questions about, I feel like social media is destroying my focus, and the idea of slop media, slop AI is creating a then comparison to human-made things that are also slop and doom scrolling and endless scrolling, and the ways that Facebook and Instagram and TikTok were made by the same people that make slot machines. And I'm blanking on the book about it, but there are a few books about this that I've read. A lot of the same techniques that go into keeping a person playing a slot machine or any other game. This has also leaked its way into gaming, as gaming companies look at how people play the games and where they put them down, where these platforms are designed to keep us on them as long as possible, and people are figuring it out and they don't want to be part of it. And so picking up a book is a way you could still have your phone, or reading a book is a way you can have your phone and be reading on the phone, but it activates all the things that you would like to have from a book. Yeah, there's still a lot of other information and things like that that you get from a physical book. There's also signaling that happens with a physical book. If you're reading a physical book in a public place, you're also making a statement about, I'm reading this book. Look at me reading this book. Whereas if you're reading on your phone or you're an e-reader, that's not happening. And so that has enabled a lot of explosions in other categories that we're now seeing. I won't call end state, but they're alive and well and kicking. So romantasy, a lot of romance, a lot of really specific romance, and those all make a lot of money. And so when the critique comes up of men aren't reading, well, men are reading things like lit RPG, and they're still reading a lot of science fiction. They're still reading thrillers. And you look at where the action is on Amazon in the categories, if we're going to use Amazon as our metric, as far as sales ranks and what is at the top of the various lists, there's still plenty of things that men read. Those just aren't necessarily the things that, as consolidation has continued to happen in the industry, that those big publishers are buying. And also the statements that agents have made about what they're looking for doesn't look like those are the things they're looking for. But like my publisher, Athon, is publishing a lot of stuff. And a lot of it, I think they published maybe 300 titles last year. If not, it's getting very close. And they have a lot of male readers. So that is data that does not get caught in a lot of these conversations. It also gets caught up. People want to make it a culture war. And there's so much, I think, to use another dangerous word, intersectionality in, or I should just say concurrence in all the things that are happening between how it's marketed, consolidation in the industry, how writers are sort of marketed to in a certain way, who has the extra money to spend on this, who has the time, who's talking about it, who uses social media and talks about it more. And those could break down to be certain people that maybe aren't the people that are getting a lot of attention in these various places, but that doesn't mean they're not reading. That's a tangent. It was interesting to me to read about this from 1974, that people have been having this debate for 50 years. I will say, to Ursula's credit, she steps out of the stereotype and still says, like, I think we can be aware of all these things. I think we can be aware of what's working against people in the United States to encourage them not to read fantasy, not to exercise their imaginations. And I don't have the line with me, but she has a statement that's about a child, basically an adult in which the child has been controlled, or an adult is a child who has been taught not to imagine. And that was a powerful line that was also sad. But imagination plays such a strong part in our world. And I do think we're probably encouraged more now than we had been in previous days. When I think about my dad coming up and the things that he was allowed to or encouraged to think about when he was a kid. My dad was an artist. I shouldn't say he was an artist. He can draw. And he did a lot of artistic things. My grandfather actually was a sign painter for a good part of his lifetime, which was, industrial lettering, I guess, out on a billboard. So my family, the men in my family, have been artistic in a lot of ways, but usually it was always manifested in building things, doing things. I had an uncle that was really into videography. He was an Air Force officer. My dad could have been an engineer, I think, but that just wasn't a career field that kind of existed in his world. So he's a diesel mechanic who has fabricated so many things in his lifetime. One of his biggest frustrations with the heavy logging industry, or just the heavy equipment that he works with in general, is that they've moved away from the ability to repair so many things. It's all modular, it's all software controlled. And so it used to be he'd be presented with a problem on a piece of equipment, especially older tractors where parts weren't available anymore. And he would fabricate the part, or he would design a new part and fabricate it himself and fix it. And there's definitely imagination that goes into that. There are so many aspects of imagining a thing, making it real, creating it, drawing it, So I felt like she's really focusing on a very narrow aspect of imagination and imagining things like elves and goblins and dragons and the Lord of the Rings. I mean, she brings up Tolkien explicitly. So the Lord of the Rings idea of imagining fantastical things and how that enables us or frees us to approach the world in a fresh and different way. And I agree with that. I feel like men in our generation, or we are more free and we have more examples of things like that. I mean, look at the average Marvel movie. It's a fantasy, right? Nobody calls it a fantasy, but it's absolutely a fantasy. And then the straight up success of the Lord of the Rings movies, like I would say men drove a lot of that success. Women too, but stereotyping in that they aren't exercising imagination, it was just a narrow way of looking at it. I also think I might be holding this, obviously maybe I'm a little defensive because I'm a man, try to be. And so that always will make you a little defensive if you're reading a thing like that. And it was also only like a 1,500 word essay. So in today's world, I won't call it rage bait. Maybe it would have gotten a different response if it was a tweet or something. Because I don't feel, the thing about Ursula K. LeGuin that I love is I never feel that she is unkind. being an Oregonian, she's very important to me. I have an aunt who was a teacher her whole career that kind of looked like Ursula K. LeGuin a little bit. I met Ursula K. LeGuin before she died, so I should just say that too. Like I love Earthsea. I've really kind of held her up as somebody that in my state and my world was just one of the best things. She's one of the best people Oregon has ever produced, right? And a lot of who she was came from living in Oregon. So I take her word seriously, but I also try to remember that this was written 50 years ago. So I'm thinking about it in that context. How are these ideas that were expressed back then relate to what we're living through today? What things have changed? What have not? What has broadened for us? So my point there, and I'm doing a mini review, I guess, is that I enjoy reading things from that are that old because, especially that relate to something like science fiction and fantasy. And I want to look for more stuff like this. There's a ton of, I shouldn't say a ton, there are a few YouTubers, I think, that are doing essay type material about science fiction. I just listened to one that kind of pissed me off because he said Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky had bad prose. And I've been really struggling with that. What is bad prose? Who thinks it's bad? What makes it bad? Maybe we could objectively say these are the things that are bad prose. And then a book that has objectively bad prose sells millions of copies. So what is the measure? If the measure is actually in the reader and reader enjoyment, because should that ultimately be what it is, or should writers and critics decide what is bad prose? I don't know. We're not Austrian artists back in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? At the opera house, objectively measuring whether opera is good or not. So I've been reading that. Sorry, that was a tangent. I also read, I was looking for some short stories to read because this also goes back to the very beginning of the week. And I think I said this in the last update, was I was excited about Shadows of Time coming out by Christopher Rocchio. It arrived. The first version I got from Amazon, the hardback was messed up. So it came in its own box. That was good. But then the book was misprinted or printed poorly. When you opened it up, like a couple of pages were crooked, and that made me mad. So, the cool thing about Amazon, I try not to buy too many books from Amazon, but it's easy to exchange, right? So they're going to send me another one. Cool. It comes pretty quickly, but it comes in a big box, just thrown in there with everything else. So the hardback that I spent $30 on is like shifting around, banging against all the other stuff in the box. So I swapped out slipcovers from the other book. The slipcover was in good shape to the new one that wasn't misprinted, and then sent it back. And I hope somebody gets a deal on that book at some point. That's typically what seems to happen. You can watch when new books come out and there will be no used copies. And then a couple weeks go by and used copies will appear as bookstores get them, or people return them to Amazon and you start seeing the, used near new, whatever condition from Amazon. And I often think that's what's happening. Or people read it and send it back, or don't like it and send it back. That happens all the time. My favorite kind of used book, which I look for all the time, are library remainders, because I love it when they cover them, in Mylar and all the cool stuff that they do. Like, it doesn't really bother me that it's got marks inside and whatnot, but oftentimes they're first editions. It's kind of cool that it was in a library and a lot of people read it. I wrote a short story once, which I'm still kind of working on, about a woman who has a magic ability to pull the life from things that have interacted with a lot of people. And so one of the things that she does is she buys library books because they've passed through a lot of hands, right? And so a copy of Stephen King's The Stand, which could be totally dog-eared and destroyed, that was in a library free rack, is like an atom bomb for her because it has so much life in it. I'm still working on that story. I tried to make it a post-apocalyptic story, and I think I was just piling too much stuff on it because I was trying to make the books hard to get. And I think that was the least important part of the story. So I'm going to come back to that one. So anyway, I took a break from well, I shouldn't say that. I was listening to Shadows of Time. And I was also reading, but I got about 3 chapters in, and Rockio starts this extended flashback. And he's done this before with other books where he did a kind of weird, because the whole Sun Eater series is first person. And the problem with first person is it requires a lot of action because you've only got one character doing a thing. So you need a lot of incident in the book, a lot of emotion, a lot of the character responding to things. That one person has to chew up a whole lot of time and scenery and thought to keep the reader engaged, I think. One of the reasons I think that like a short, fast, hard-hitting book does really well when it's first person is because it doesn't have to communicate as much. Well, Sunkiller is this huge epic space fantasy thing from one person's point of view. And Rockio did something really cool between books 1 and 2, which at the time was just like, that's cool. Like basically in this world, characters can go into fugue in order to travel faster than light or, go zoom around the galaxy, as you will. And you get into book 2, and there's basically the character, it turns out he's the head of this mercenary company, and all these things happened, and he's progressed from being kind of a street urchin, gladiator, worked his way up in Empire of Silence, to now he's roving the galaxy with his own spaceship, right? He's leveling up. The power fantasy is increasing. But all this stuff happened off stage, and so the author is kind of like, yeah, we live in a world where that could have been 2 books in my 12-book series, but I don't have to do that. So that all happened. And I just thought that was, in today's world, like, that's a pretty ballsy move. Like, that's cool. I like that. Well, as the series has progressed, he's done less and less of that. He had, I think it was book 5, I can't remember exactly. The character is basically captured by aliens and tortured for most of the book. And that was all stuff that, it's a great exercise in just how to beat the crap out of a character, but it just kind of goes on. And a lot of the feedback on that is, that's a lot. We didn't necessarily need to see all that. And then there's also another sequence where he uses another character to do a flashback to show another part of a battle sequence where the main character wasn't physically located. And I'll be honest, I skipped all that. Like, as soon as I saw it was a flashback, I was like, yeah, I don't really want to read that. So I kind of like skipped through it. Yeah. What's happening? Okay. And I felt a little bad about that because I want to give the book its due. I do feel like this is a story that has a lot of care given to it. And it's a really neat, Rockio is just a neat success story of a person that he'd been writing this series since he was like 16, published it at 22, had a job with Bain as an editor. And so he's had a little bit of a charmed, author life, which is cool. I'm very happy for this guy. But this book, like, I just hit another roadblock like that and stopped. And I'll go back to it. But I was a little surprised by that. I was like, this is a book 7. This is the end of the series. I really should be just tearing through this book. And maybe if I was reading it physically as opposed to listening to it. But I reached a point where I was listening to it, and actually the character's voice changed in the way the narrator was, narrating the character, and it was kind of whiny. And I was like, wait a second, this isn't our main character anymore. This is not Hadrian Marlowe, who is the super badass of the universe guy that can't die. And that was like, wait a second. And I backed up and realized we'd moved into a flashback, and I was just like, whatever, I'll put it down. And I just haven't picked it back up. So from an author perspective, and I've received this feedback on other things I've written. I did a book, Lissa's Dream has flashbacks in it. Flashbacks on a chapter basis that go back to when the characters were in an academy. And Mallory told me at the time, the readers aren't going to like this. And I was adamant, like, well, this is important character stuff. They need to read this. Or they need to get this, I guess. And consistently, the feedback I've received on that book is that I don't like the flashbacks. Although these were flashbacks with the same characters. It wasn't like I moved to a different character or did some weird mechanism where I'm showing another part of the story through another character's flashback as it's being told to the main character. which is just kind of a weird construction. So I'll come back to it, but I felt because I wasn't ready to pick up another book and start reading it, so that's what led me to reading these shorter things. So I also, in reorganizing my e-reader, I found a copy of Grimdark magazine from 2023 that I hadn't read yet. And it had a Chris Rocchio story in it. So I read that. I wouldn't actually call it a full short story. It was really more like a scene from the Sun Eater series. And that's one of the things that I want to say, I think as a business model, Rocchio has done really well. So he had a publishing agreement with Daw, then Baen, now back to Daw. And like most publishing agreements, there's a certain amount of exclusivity given on, what you can write with a publisher when it comes to those characters in that world. Like, they typically get first right of refusal, which means that if you're going to write a book in that world, they can choose to publish it or not publish it. And if they don't publish it, that gives you the right to go shop it somewhere else or publish it yourself or do whatever. Well, he got the ability to write side books in the same world with other characters. And so he's done that where the main series will move forward in first person with the main character, and then he'll do novellas, which I think are often third person. I'd have to go back and look, with side characters who were characters that you really liked. And I would say that has been very effective. I've enjoyed reading those books. The pricing on Amazon, like, I want to say that ebooks were still in Kindle Unlimited, but then they had, using Amazon's, hardback feature, selling those for $20 and $25. And I'm sure fans are buying those. So that gives him more of a direct income stream. It gives him the opportunity to explore those characters outside of the main series, where readers have an expectation of first person badass Hadrian Marlowe. And then the really interested or super fans can go read this other stuff. And I think that's a really good model, because then you're giving readers more of what they want without watering down the main series. The main series can be lean and move fast and get through the story. Because I will say, at this point in the story, I would just like to know what happens. And I shouldn't be like that. I should want to experience the world more. So I think I just need to come back to it. Maybe I am not ready to read this book. But anyway, I started reading this copy of Grimdark magazine. It's also got a Ken Scholes story in it, who is a Portland writer that I like. He's a nice guy. Grimdark has always been an interesting market to me. They don't take submissions. It's typically, I believe they solicit everything they do. They do a lot of interviews with people. So it would be neat to be published in Grimdark. I think it's the kind of place that you need an agent to get into. And that hasn't been on my list of things to do. Maybe someday. I don't know. I talked to some people at Oricon that agents had really done right by them and helped them out in a lot of ways. But then I had another conversation with an author, Curtis Chen, who had he had a trilogy. He did 2 books in the series, and then the publisher didn't want to move forward with the 3rd book. So he ended up publishing it himself, but his agent was just a huge supporter for him. And the agent helped get him the original series deal, and then put a lot of effort into shopping the last book around to try and keep that series alive. So that was a big help to him. And then another writer that an agent was getting him his first book deal. So it's a thing that I've thought about. It's not a thing I can do right now. So let's see. The other thing I wanted to mention that I've done that's been really helpful is my work PC is also a gaming PC. It's the one I'm recording this video on right now. And I did a thing where I basically separated tasks into users on the PC. This is a Windows 11 PC. I also use a Mac and Linux, but for most work, it's between Mac and PC. One of the features I really like on the Mac is profiles, where you can switch between profiles. You can make different notification settings and things like that. But there is a lot of tinkering that goes into setting that up, which that gets pretty annoying. This was easier, and I was a little worried that because I also use Office and OneDrive, and the reason for that is most editors use Office and Word and publishers. I went through and made individual profiles. I set those up for writing, video, work. I've got one for work also because I do like other, day job stuff on this machine. And basically set each one up so that it was just for like the taskbar is all just apps related to those tasks. I didn't sign in. The only thing I signed into in my browser was stuff that I needed for those tasks. So just creating a lot of friction to get away from the task and do anything else. And it's been working really well. I'll say that if I come into my office and I have not like logged into one of those profiles with the thing that I wanted to do the next morning, the regular profile that kind of has all the other stuff I'm dinking around with all the time, 9 times out of 10, it will suck me into something I see on the screen. And so I've really been trying to make sure I log out of or switch to one of the other profiles and just get right to the thing I wanted to do. This sort of ties into getting up in the morning and being able to like get up early. This is the time I have to do this thing, and I'm not going to waste that time playing a game or surfing the internet or reading social media or whatever. So I wanted to pass that along because it's been really helpful. And then the other thing, let's talk about things I need to do for the rest of the week. So I got the final like copy back on my story that's going to be in Running with Sharp Objects, the anthology that Chris Kennedy Publishing is doing. I got some feedback on that story that was just really, really amazing. So I'm happy that story hit the way I wanted it to. I needed to do kind of a final read through of the story, make any line edits that I want, and then I'll send it back. I did a brief read through, and it's amazing to me how like you can stare at a thing, think you have it right, you send it to an editor finds things that somehow I didn't see. And then the third time, after it's gone through like multiple sets of eyes, I still find things that I wish I had seen to begin with. So yeah, I'm going to fix those things today. That's on my list of things to do. And then this week I have probably 5,000 words left in Lyssa's Vengeance, and I am going to finish this dang book. So that is my main order of business. But also a friend is reading the Insert Coin story to give me some feedback. And in this case, the only feedback I'm really asking for is where were you confused and where were you bored? That's kind of what I want to know about this. I'm not getting deep into line editing and things like that. I've done everything I can to make it as clean as possible. I'll do another read through. I'll probably listen to it out loud as well. I'll have like something read it to me so I can also listen to the flow of it. But it's due by the 28th. I want to get that story submitted. I was thinking about what I would do with the story if they don't accept it, and I'll come up with something. It's kind of long, so maybe I'll try submitting it other places and see what happens. But because it was aimed right at this market, I don't know. I've been thinking when it comes to writing short stories, I do want to direct them at markets, at story prompts. But when you do that, does it make it less attractive to other markets? I don't know. But submitting short stories is definitely on my list of goals currently. So I'll keep working on that. I'll keep you posted. I also made a huge mistake last week where I got pinged by Jeff Haskell about, hey, how are the edits on Retreat Hell going? And I was like, I haven't got it back from the editor yet. And he's like, I'm pretty sure he sent it back to you. I'm like, what? And I go back into my email and I find where I got it back on October 29th. And so that is bad because I didn't say thank you and acknowledge the editor when they sent it back to me. So it's just been radio silence from me on that, which is not a thing I want to do. And then I also could have read through the book. I had time to do that. So I'll also be giving some time to that this week, looking at the edits. I trust this editor a lot when it comes to line edits. It's really, at this point, I'm more focused on content edits and character consistency and things like that. And then really I'm jumping into outlining for the last Lyssa book in this 5-book series and the next Grimswar book with Jeff, because that'll be my next 2 big projects that I'm working on. And I will say having like multiple projects has been fun, because when I reach a wall with one thing, rather than switch off the writing task, which the profiles kind of help with that as well, because I'm not switching easily away from one thing I was doing. I switch to another writing task and jump into that and kind of exercise different muscles. And so that's been a thing that's been working pretty well. And in general, like mentally, I feel clear, which is, I think, something I haven't felt for a long time. I feel like I keep saying it since I started these videos, but I don't know how to express how bad it's been the last few years, where I just felt like I couldn't focus. I wasn't motivated. And when I sat down to do something, all I did was zone off and do something else. And I hate that. So I'm really grateful that has been working. Okay, so goals for this week coming up. I'm actually off because I'm off regular day job because of Thanksgiving and my daughter's out of school. So finishing Lissa's Vengeance, line edits on Running with Sharp Objects, line edits on, it's called The Wraith of Ascalon, and then finishing or reading through Retreat Hell. And then I may do some more tinkering with the content essay thing that I obviously have thoughts about. And then maybe try and get some more reading done, and also spend time with family and eat turkey. And then I'm doing on Sunday, some friends are coming over, and we're going to do a 1-page rule playthrough of a Warhammer campaign. And I have never played Warhammer. And so I need to actually, one of the things I'm also going to do is get the files and I think the faction I have, I'm pretty sure what it's going to be, and I'm going to print miniatures of the faction. So I'm pretty excited about that too. So that's going to be fun. And that's something I've never done before. So I'm pretty excited for that to happen. And these are all friends that I don't get to see very often. So I'm pretty excited to spend an extended period of time with them. All right. Hopefully there were fewer filler words in this conversation, and I really appreciate you hanging out with me. If you find these journals interesting, there's more of them and they'll keep going. And a few other writers have shown up in the comments. I really appreciate you stopping by, and let me know if you're also a writer. Let me know if these are helpful. I'd like to know what you're up to and working on. I do this because there was another podcast I liked a lot called Author Journeys, and he stopped doing them. He was a thriller writer, and he stopped doing them because I think it was time for him to move on to other things, but he kept saying like he didn't know if they were helpful to people. And I found them very helpful. I just liked to hear that someone was doing the thing I was trying to do on a weekly basis, even if it wasn't the same thing I was trying to do. So that's one of the reasons I'm doing this. Also, it helps me look back and see that, oh yeah, I actually did accomplish things, because time moves way too fast. So podcasts and YouTube being what they are, please subscribe if you haven't, and let me know what you'd like to hear more of. Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate you hanging out, and I will talk to you next time. See ya.